Alright guys, so I can hardly keep up with the madness, and if I look disheveled, it's because I crawled out of a hole to make this update. I was busy stacking cans of tuna. But let's get to it. Now, for years since the Russian conflict, we have been saying time and time again, China and the US would decouple. And the warning signs are starting to flash in neon red. It's going to be a brave new world. What Beijing is doing tells us an economic war is coming, and what Washington is saying just confirms this as well. But let's start with China. Mainstream media has finally realized the Chinese are sanction proofing their most important import, and that is food. The vital resource to feed 1.4 billion people is shifting from Western producers to China's allies. And we have the return of Trump to thank for that. Importers from China, they're scrambling all the way to Bolivia and Kenya to replace their Western suppliers. Now, what's more important than oil and gas? What's more vital than AI chips? Is the food we eat. And as we have seen from the Arab Spring back in 2010, there's only so much food prices can rise before total chaos happens. And in China, there's nothing more important than domestic stability. And if Trump one day forces the G7 to cut food supply to China, and if the dependence is still there, Beijing will be in big trouble. However, they have been planning ahead, and now this massive shift in demand is going to happen. They are the biggest importer of food in the world. Total imports are valued at $140 billion. So this tsunami of demand is going to shift from the G7 towards China's economic allies. In other words, the BRICS and their partners, and it's going to be boomtown Charlie for them. This isn't good for the West. US and EU farmers, they're going to face a world of rising input costs. Now, Trump wants John Deere to make the machines in US factories. The EU also has a very bad energy crisis. And if China continues pulling the plug, the farming industry could be decimated. And by all measures, it could shrink because the biggest consumer is walking away. Basic demand and supply here. And let's take agriculture for example. Grain and wheat imports are dropping like a rock. Western suppliers are seeing a negative growth, minus 12.3%. When demand drops, this poses a big problem to US farmers. Either they dump their food or they have to sell the produce at a discount. And if this continues long enough, they will have to shut down the farms. But look where China is buying more from. Imports from Latin America, they are exploding. Asia, Russia, and Africa, they are supplying more food to the Chinese markets. To put it simply, what the G7 is losing, BRICS countries, they are starting to benefit. Now, the West will be forced to trade more amongst themselves. They have to buy their own oil, gas, and food, except prices will be significantly higher. Now, China doesn't really want to decouple. They are, in fact, trying to globalize with the rest of the world. But just like the Russian oil sanctions, it's the threat of the West that pushing the Chinese economy away. Now, the US is pushing TSMC and Samsung to ban chip sales to China. The administration wants to choke away Chinese technology. Oh, but it gets worse here, guys. Biden, he's burning everything around him before he leaves. The US has banned imports from 37 new China companies. The excuse is forced labor, so companies like solar producers, they can't trade with the US. Billions of dollars in trade is going to be affected. Now, you could say that this is the Biden admin going crazy days before the new regime. But is it really? Could this just be a continuation of the containment policy? Because something tells me, at least when it comes to China, it's the deep state that's running things. Maybe even Trump can't do much against the current momentum. But regardless of that, we know China, they have been stockpiling a ton of food for many decades now. Anything and everything that can be stored is being hoarded just in case. Over 200 million tons in maize, 150 million in wheat, and another 150 million in rice plus soybeans. This is an existential threat that could take down the Chinese economy. Now, there's a lot of talking heads saying China's stockpiling for war, but it's just basic prudence. Imagine the level of chaos if over a billion people don't have enough food. Now, the shift away from G7 farmers is serious here. Back in 2018, Trump had to desperately reverse Chinese sanctions on US food imports, and it was a very big deal back then.
The agreement tears down major market barriers for U.S. food and agricultural exports. China will now welcome American beef and pork, poultry, seafood, rice, dairy, infant formula, animal feed, biotechnology, and much, much more.
However, this situation is going to reverse, and it could be a very big bargaining chip China has. So the coming US tariffs might not reach 60% on Chinese goods if Beijing plays that card. But assuming that they don't, this pivot is going to produce big winners and big losers. China's meat imports reveals to us the roadmap ahead. Now just sit back and think a little. Where is China building their supply chains? Where are they busy building ports? And it's South America. Import permits from non-Western countries are going up. So we have Brazil, Argentina, and Bolivia benefiting the most from this pivot in demand. It makes total sense after all, and it's technically safer to buy food from Latin America. You help build the ports so the supply chain from the farmers all the way to the ships, they're quite secure. Trump's trade war is only going to accelerate things, which would put US agriculture under tremendous pressure. And it's not good for income and farmers, they can't scale up their production. Now, while it's true that China's population is coming down on the aggregate, we have to look closer at the real drivers of food demand, and that's going to be the middle class. There are a ton of people being lifted out of poverty. Now, by 2030, demand for food is going to explode. 80 million people will be lifted from lower income into the middle class, and that's like a quarter of the entire US population. China doesn't have enough food production. They will have to import the grains and the meat in. And this is one market Beijing can weaponize in the coming trade wars. Now, for them, understand the playbook here. The US has the almighty dollar and the biggest consumer market. But Chinese demand for food can really do a number on the US economy. So things are devolving into a tit for tat strategy. Now, I'm sure Trump is aware that food is a weak point in the economy. Because if this falls, there's going to be a deadly domino effect. It could start at American farms, but the pain will spread all the way to Walmart through higher inflation. Now, these are the number of US jobs supported by American exports to China. Over 18 billion in oilseeds and grain, that's number one. Chinese demand is supporting almost 180,000 jobs. In third place are meat exports, and that supports over 30,000 jobs. And in position number 6, nearly 30 grand jobs are supported by China's crop demand. So Beijing does have some bargaining power here. It's going to be risky for Trump to go pedal to the metal. A 30 or 40% tariff on China will probably happen, but I highly doubt a 60% tariff would occur. And that's just going to invite Armageddon. China will be forced to respond, and they're going to drop the hammer on food imports. The issue we have isn't just US jobs on the line, it's more to do with farms closing down. Because if that happens, it's going to jack the price of food higher because costs they are all going to go up. And the last thing we need is higher food prices. We can see how unstable food inflation is becoming. Now, what happened in 2020 to 2023? We had massive money printing from the Federal Reserve to save the economy. But at the same time, the supply of goods dropped because we were in lockdown. So you have more money chasing fewer goods, and that leads to higher inflation. It's very simple to understand this, and that's why the CPI for food almost hit 10%. But have we really learned from our mistakes? Because if the US corners China with a trade war, well, Beijing could just pull the rug here. Demand could collapse and cause another supply chain shock. So 2025 could be a very messy year indeed. And these are just the moves from the Chinese. What the US is planning ahead is also signaling doom and gloom. And it's coming from maybe the biggest China hawk in Trump's cabinet, Marco Rubio. And he's really obsessed about Beijing. He even wrote a 58-page report titled The World China Made. It's fascinating and shows you how some elements of Washington, they already know the challenge ahead. The charts here are actually quite good. This in particular shows China has already surpassed the US in high-value exports. In 2022, China's share went from 8% to 13%, while US exports have been going sideways for decades. The report is valuable because it tells us the psyche in the Trump administration. When the US says they are looking to reshore production and bring manufacturing back, they really mean it. And projecting this out, we can expect the US to try and continue to contain China's economy. Maybe it will be through tariffs, maybe it involves Greenland and Canada, but something is going to happen because Rubio's his biggest fear in the world, his biggest nightmare is China.
But then, not to mention, we do have near-peer adversaries. We didn't 25 years ago. The United States lived in a unipolar world where we were the only show in town. Now there are at least one unprecedented near-peer adversary. The Chinese Communist Party is a challenge to the United States, unlike greater even than what the Soviet Union was, because they are a commercial rival, a technological rival, a geopolitical rival, a diplomatic rival, and a commercial one. And in addition to all of that, they are also a military threat to the country as they continue to develop. And they have an interest in the region. They want to extract minerals and have mineral rights, certainly, but they also want leverage. They want control over countries so that they'll vote with them at international fora, and ultimately so they could potentially position themselves either on a rotational basis or permanently all over the world militarily and the like. In essence, they would love nothing more than to encircle the United States and to have put themselves in a position in each of the countries, for example, that all of you have been nominated to serve in, but more broadly in the region.
But let's seal the deal here. Let's hammer the nail in the economic coffin. We don't need to look far in this case. Marco Rubio just made it crystal clear. According to him, China has cheated their way to power, that they have used the post-war global order against the United States. It is now a weapon being used against us, and this could be his official speech to Congress. Now, I don't know about you, but this sounds like a really dangerous declaration. For one, both countries, they benefited from the post-World War order. US companies, they made use of cheap Chinese labor, let's not forget about that, and they made trillions of dollars in the process. So it's very bizarre to say the least when you hear things like this, but as we said earlier, it does give us a glimpse behind the corridors of power. Now this of course will have big repercussions. China will be on high alert, and don't be surprised if things escalate hard in 2025. China could unleash even more stimulus and ramp up their own sanctions on the US. It's really insane, but there's no reverse gear on both sides now. We are still on the sanctions escalator. But let me know what you think. Will China decouple further from the US? And what is Marco Rubio even doing here? Let me know in the comments below. Stay safe. Be sure to smash the like button and subscribe as we navigate through these crazy times.